Euro 2012 kicks off in Poland and Ukraine amid fears that racism could overshadow the tournament. But are these fears real, and how does this reflect on the host nations? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darina Abugaida. Euro 2012 kicked off on Friday, and while Europe's biggest footballing event gets underway, the tournament is overshadowed by accusations of racism by host nations Poland and Ukraine. The Dutch team claim they've already been subjected to racist chants during a training session, an incident UEFA says was not racially motivated. Joanna Gaszurowska has more.
While the co-hosts quietly put the finishing touches to their preparations ahead of the Euro 2012 opening fixture against Greece, it was a world away from the fanfare that greeted the Netherlands, who'd opened their doors to 25,000 spectators on Wednesday. But this was the moment the session turned ugly. Dutch captain Mark van Bommel shepherded his players away to the other end of the Wisła Kraków stadium after he and some of his teammates heard racist chants directed at the squad's black players.
They had exercises at that stand, and they just had to move all the exercises to the other side because they were constantly abused. So when they went to the other side, of course, then it stopped a little bit because they didn't know what happened.
Fears of racist fans hijacking the tournament have blighted the build-up to the 2012 Euro Championships in Poland and Ukraine. UEFA have confirmed it will take action if there is a repeat of the abuse. That's after the organisation's president, Michel Platini, said that referees would be allowed to stop matches if abuse towards players became an issue. But here in Warsaw, it's clear that the majority of Poles do not feel like that. I've been to the fan zone here with 50,000 people from different ethnic backgrounds. They've all had a great time, and they say they're disgusted with the way a small group of football hooligans in Kraków have behaved and managed to grab the headlines on the eve of this tournament.
The problem is that it's always generated but very small, limited number of pseudo supporters, which you know, they are very loud, so they are visible even if there is very small number of them.
Sometimes supporters may sing that racism chants or something, and I think it's a really good idea to stop the match when that's happened.
And it's not just UEFA feeling the pressure. The Polish Prime Minister has also now turned on the charm offensive, inviting press to attend a lunch with a Polish MP of Nigerian descent.
I want you to know that Poland is a very, very hospitable place. I've been living in Poland now for 19 years. I'm a member of the Polish Parliament, and I want to assure you that I've never been to a more hospitable place than in Poland.
But it might now take more than just a charm offensive to convince both fans and players if this situation persists once the tournament gets into its stride. Joanna Gaszurowska, Al Jazeera, Warsaw.
So what do these claims mean for the two host nations? Let's bring in our guests to discuss this. In London, professional footballer Zesh Rahman. He's an ambassador for Kick It Out. That's an English organisation dedicated to equality and inclusion in football. In Warsaw, Gavin Hamilton, editor of World Soccer magazine, and over in Sevastopol via Skype, Anton Shekovtsov. He's a research fellow at the University of Northampton and an expert in extremist movements in Europe. Welcome all of you gentlemen to this edition of Inside Story. Gavin, before the tournament even began, black Dutch players say they were allegedly subjected to monkey chants by Polish fans during a training session that took place in Poland. But UEFA has come out and said that this incident is not racially motivated and it won't be investigating. What's your reaction?
Well, it clearly was disturbing for the Dutch players because they moved to another part of the training pitch away from those chants during the session. So it clearly did concern the players. And the Dutch, it became an issue in the Dutch media because it was raised by the Dutch media reports. But the Dutch Football Association have not taken any further and not made a complaint. And UEFA, I think, are sort of scared of making an issue of it because they're worried that this might encourage sort of copycat incidents elsewhere, and particularly in matches which are being beamed around the world.
Zesh, do you expect this to be an isolated incident, or do you expect to see more incidents throughout the Euro 2012 tournament?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we'll see more, because it's been well documented. There's a lot of issues in Poland and Ukraine, and it's not going to just be stamped out over one tournament. You have to go right into the grassroots, the school kids and the lower levels of the game, and to implement the education there before it can be stopped at professional football clubs. So unfortunately, I think we'll see repeat cases.
Anton, your perspective on this particular case, and also, do you feel that there are real fears here of racism and racist behaviour that could overshadow the tournament?
Well, I think that the recent publications and reports in the British media, they are quite strongly exaggerated towards the fears of violence, racist violence in Ukraine and in Poland. There may be, of course, incidents such as with the Dutch players being subjected to racist abuse, monkey chanting, whatever. But I really doubt that violence will happen during the tournament.
So, Anton, why do you think then that UEFA has come out and said that it won't be investigating this incident?
Well, I think that this question should be addressed to UEFA, why they are not investigating. But one of the reasons why I think they're doing this is that they don't want to spoil the whole tournament straight away from day one.
Anton, I'm just going to stay with you for a moment because you raised a point about an editorial that you wrote, and you said that condemnation in the British media of racist incidents in Ukraine has moved from concern to hysteria, and you call this unfair. Why do you say that is?
I wrote this piece because I read a lot of articles in the British media and also saw some reports on Sports Channel and BBC Panorama. I was concerned about the representation of Ukraine in the British media when not all the Ukrainian characters that were showed in those programs and addressed in the articles, they're like racist, but no normal Ukrainian was ever mentioned. Like not any organizations was even mentioned that trying to fight racism in Ukraine. So I think this is just unfair because every Ukrainian was a racist in those reports. The far-right organizations and lying policemen, etc.
Zesh, what's your take? Do you think that the portrayal of Ukraine and Poland has been unfair, as Anton is saying?
I think, you have to highlight the issue. You can't get away from the fact that there is big problems there. But again, suppose it could be a little bit harsh because you cannot tarnish everybody with the same brush. It doesn't mean they're all racist or they're all football hooligans, but I think in the same token, you have to raise the awareness, and the work of organisations like Kick It Out is what needs to be done more by going into schools, local communities, working with players as role models to go out there and educate the next generation who are going to be your future football fans. So if they are a little bit more aware of the different cultures and backgrounds that they're growing up with, then hopefully it will help to decrease the number of incidents of racism in the game.
Right, we'll talk about the recommendations a little later in the programme, but Gavin, do you think that claims of racism when it comes to football in Poland and Ukraine has been sensationalised by the press?
I don't think they've been sensationalised. I think there's inevitably, when a major tournament takes place, the media focus on the negative aspects of that country and the potential problems that there may be. In London at the moment, we're all complaining about how the transport system is going to collapse when the Olympics comes to town, and the traffic is going to be horrendous. In Brazil for the World Cup in 2014, we're focusing on how the airports have not been built because that's the biggest major problem facing Brazil. So I think with Poland and Ukraine, it was natural for the media chasing a story to look at the fact that racism is now a monumental issue within European football because there are so many black players, high-profile players, and many countries and UEFA have taken big strides over the last 20 to 30 years to deal with the problem. And countries like Poland and Ukraine and across Eastern Europe have all had problems with racism, particularly when teams from Western Europe featuring Black and African players travel and play club competitions and international matches. There have been systematic instances of racial abuse, and that's been a problem persistent in Eastern Europe for the last 20 or 30 years. And when you have the first major international football tournament taking place in Eastern Europe, it's natural for the media to focus on those issues. So I think we're perfectly entitled, and I think it's healthy to have that debate. And it also, as we said earlier, it's healthy to focus on these issues and really put the attention on Poland and Ukraine and say, what are you doing to tackle these problems? And often it's the case that these countries say, we haven't got a problem. And therein lies the real problem.
Right. Anton, your take, is there any more racism, in your opinion, in Poland and Ukraine than other countries in Europe, such as England and France, for example, when it comes to football and sports?
Well, I would say that, of course, racism is a problem in Ukraine. But if I compare with other countries, Ukraine and Poland, they may be worse in this sense. But if we look at what happened, for example, in Britain in the 90s or even earlier in the 80s and the 70s, it was a very big issue with racism there in Britain, for example. We can also say the same about other Western European nations like Spain or France, but maybe not today, not in the 21st century, of course. But they had major problems with racism in football. Ukraine, unfortunately, has not yet started to recognize the problem. I mean, on the official level, and this, I think, is one of the problems why racism persists in the society.
Zesh, what must be done for governments to recognize the problem, and whose issue is it to tackle racism? Is it the governing bodies that must stand up and be able to tackle the problem, or does it come more at a state level?
I think the responsibility lies with everybody, from the governing bodies of the game to the football fans, to the coaches, to the referees, because there needs to be educational packs for everybody on what's acceptable and what's not. And I think, I've touched on it already, but I think it starts at an early age. It starts at an early age with the school children, with the parents, because ultimately racism stems from ignorance and a lack of education. So if you start at the grassroots levels and have official programs that are implemented by football clubs and supported by the government and supported by governing bodies of the game, then I think you go some way in reducing the number of incidents that we're unfortunately having. And Britain did have its issues in the 70s and 80s and 90s, but if you look now, there are far less isolated cases because it's worked and it's helped to tackle those major issues that were there. And I think Ukraine and Poland can look into what's already been done and maybe learn from that.
Well, if we look at the tournament for a moment, Zesh, now UEFA is saying that referees, if there are incidents of racism or racist behaviour during the matches, then referees will decide whether the chants are racist or not. When you look at the tournament and the games, is that the way to go to tackle the immediate problem should it occur?
No, I think if, for example, if the referee is the owner of the game, so to speak, so he should be able to make the decision. But if a player experiences racism from the crowds during the game, I think as tough as it is, because I've experienced some racism growing up myself, especially on a football pitch, you need to stay on the pitch and you need to deal with it at the end of the game, because, by walking off the pitch or threatening to walk off the pitch, it's showing the person who's dishing out the racism that they've won, so you don't want to be sending out that signal. I think UEFA and the governing bodies should really isolate and highlight those people dishing it out and punish them accordingly. And by that, in my opinion, there should be lifetime bans for people who are seen on camera and on TV actually being the leaders or the catalysts of the racial abuse.
Gavin?
Yeah, I think the football has a responsibility to police the sport. But football, in effect, is a reflection of society, and that's what makes it such a wonderful sport. It's why millions of people will be watching the game in this fantastic stadium here later today. And football reflects society with all its problems, and football has a duty to highlight those problems. But I don't think it's just the duty of football to deal with those problems. There has to be wider action. And but I think there is also responsibility on the football authorities to practice what they preach. In that we hear a lot of words and messages from the likes of Michel Platini about how they're taking football seriously, but the punishments actually meted out to players, for example, who racially abuse other players, are really no different to players who are involved in violent conduct or other misdemeanours within the game. So I think the football authorities do have a responsibility to act in a strong manner and to really show they mean business, because it's very easy.
And when you talk about acting in a strong manner, what do you just clarify what you mean by strong manner?
Well, I mean, I think I've been in interviews with Michel Platini where he said the referee should stop the game if he feels that racial abuse of players is taking place. But he's putting the onus on the referee to take the action. UEFA, remember, is funded by the TV companies who pay to watch these matches. Now, those TV companies will not be happy if those matches are suspended and the match is overrun and these TV companies lose their advertising money. So there's a lot of complex issues involved in stopping matches. But I think that the football authorities like UEFA could do a lot more to punish fans, banning fans from attending matches, banning federations from tournaments. We've seen problems with the likes of Croatian fans in the past holding up Nazi banners at UEFA tournaments in recent years, and they've not been punished. They've often had a token fine of a few thousand euros. But if they're actually withdrawn from a competition, then those domestic authorities will be forced to act.
Anton, your perspective?
I definitely agree with what was said already about banning, about lifetime bans to people who express racist prejudice during tournaments and matches. But I would also say that if we consider racism being an illness of the society, we can't really start with football, because if we are to cure the society, the football will be, the last patient, so to say. First, I think we should focus on the society and try to eradicate racism and prejudice from the society first.
Anton, there's the argument, though, there's an argument that there's an increase in nationalism now right around Europe and in many countries. So you'll find what's described as racism practically everywhere.
Well, yes. Yes, of course, I wrote about that, about the increase of racist prejudice all over Europe. But we also see examples when political correctness really worked in some European societies. Still, there is a cordon sanitaire around the extreme right parties in Europe, although they garner more and more support every year. But still, there are positive developments as well. Like, conservative parties do not cooperate with far-right parties in Western European societies. For example, Nick Griffin was not admitted to the Garden Party that was held by the British Queen. So these are positive things which can be learned by Eastern Europeans.
Zesh, you might have some insight into this. At this point in time, if a player faces racism or racist abuse on the field, is there a system that the player can report to?
Yeah, I think, first of all, obviously, you report it to the referee and the match officials at the game. And then if need be, the police need to get involved, then they need to get involved. But I'll go back to what I said. I really believe the player must stay on the pitch. Do not walk off the pitch, because you're sending out the signal that you've been defeated by the people handing out the abuse. So once I highlight the people that are the cause of it, and if you punish them accordingly, like I said, I think lifetime ban should come into play. Then it will at least deter one or two people from going down that route if they're thinking about throwing racism about the next game. So I think if you report it and they see something done, then they'll have a ripple effect on the people that are thinking about throwing out the abuse in the future. Hopefully it will help to stop it.
Gavin, there's the argument that the Euro 2012 should not have been held in either Ukraine or Poland. What do you say?
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate argument up to a point, but then we now have Euro 2012 in Poland and Ukraine, and we're addressing the issues. We're talking about racism as a problem that needs to be dealt with over generations. FIFA are taking the World Cup to Russia in 2018. Russia has an enormous problem with racism in football. Black players have been abused in recent months, had bananas thrown at them on the pitch. It's a far more public problem in Russia. But taking the World Cup to Russia in 2018 means that we're already talking about those problems, and the Russian Football Federation are having to take action ahead of the tournament, 6 years away, and that's good and that's positive. So I think there is an argument saying that these countries could be punished by not holding the tournaments in their countries, but we'd end up holding the tournaments in Western Europe all the time, and I think FIFA and UEFA are very keen to take their football tournaments to new markets, and that means dealing with problems and dealing with new problems, and I think that inevitably in the long term can be a positive thing.
Anton, should the Euro 2012 have been held in Ukraine and Poland?
Well, of course, I was really disappointed by arguments with some football players who said that Ukraine and Poland are not really they're not worthy of having tournaments in these countries. I can't really agree with this argument at all. It's not a West Euro 2012, it's Euro 2012, and there are different societies in Europe, and of course there are problems, but East European countries should not be excluded from the larger Europe.
Zesh, do you agree?
No, I think it should be held there because it's going to bring to the forefront what the real issues are. And, you know, if we didn't have it there, it would just be swept under the carpet. And I'm sure, you know, when it gets to Russia in 6 years' time, there'll be issues that have happened in this tournament which they can possibly learn from. So if you look at it for the long term, I think there's a positive that could come out of it. You know, it could help to eradicate it or minimise the issues that we're likely to face in Russia in 6 years' time. So I think it should be held there, and you know they are worthy nations of hosting the tournament. And there'll be one or two problems, no doubt, but you know if we can learn one or two things at the end of it, that's going to improve it for the future hosting nations. Then there's a positive to be taken from it.
Right, Zeth, and there are campaigns and organizations that are anti-racism and work towards eradicating racism in sport. Do you think they're having the effect that they should be having?
Yeah, I think it's you know, it has to be done over time, and there's ways of measuring it, and that is by the decreased number of racial incidents. And if you have the organisations in place like Kick It Out and Show Racism Red Card and various governing bodies of the game in the UK and now across Europe, you know, slowly but surely the message has to sink in, and you do that by highlighting the positive cases and also by punishing the people that are responsible for putting the game into a negative spotlight. So I think it's going to take and it's going to require patience and belief in the strategies that are put in place, but you have to believe that it can be eradicated, otherwise there's no point in even talking about the issue.
Gavin?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I think it is a shame, and we have to put it on record that the relatives of black players from the England team, the likes of Theo Walcott and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain's families, don't feel comfortable travelling to Ukraine to support their sons and in the matches. And I think that is a matter of utmost regret, and I think we have to say that. But I think those incidents are far outweighed by the long-term benefits of hosting a tournament in Ukraine and Poland, because we'll see it not just with the stadiums around us and the infrastructure that is improved as a result of the tournament, but there will be issues raised that have to, and questions raised that have to be answered by the football authorities and the wider political authorities.
Right, Anton, and just final thoughts to you and whether you believe that the football authorities that Gavin was just referring to truly regard racism as a problem.
Well, I can't really deny that there is a problem with racism in Ukraine. What I do regret is that this media campaign against racism in Ukraine and in football started like 1 month before the tournament. The first reports on racism in Ukraine, they appeared last year, and the media just ignored them. But I strongly believe that the Euro 2012, at least in Ukraine, will go quite well, at least without violence on the stadiums.
All right, on that note, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks to all my guests. In London, Zesh Rahman, in Warsaw, Gavin Hamilton, and in Sevastopol, Anton Shekovtsov. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'd like to thank our viewers as always. If you'd like, you can send us your feedback, email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me and the whole team, thanks for watching and goodbye for now.